Hi everybody, welcome to our daily Bible study today. One of the shortest chapters that we've covered in the Bible so far, only 8 verses. 1 Chronicles chapter 20. We do, however, still have an outline with all the key information on it that you can download for free on our website. That's what you're seeing up on the screen right now. 1 Chronicles 20, as always, let's talk about when the events happened. Well, the book itself was written several hundred years after the reign of King David, but it records primarily the details, the events that happened during David's reign, which fell between about 1055 to 1015 BC. So you're talking about 1,000 years before Jesus' time. We've got a few characters to introduce, 3 groups of characters. First, David, the king of Israel and Judah. Second, Joab, who was the commander of David's army. And then this group of 3 Philistine champions. These great Philistine warriors were descendants of the giants, who we talked about in some previous books. They were killed by champions of Israel. The map is relatively simple today. Joab fought with the Ammonites at a city called Rabbah to the east of the Jordan River. And then Israel battled with the Philistines at Gezer and Gath, which are over there in the land of Philistia towards the Mediterranean Sea. Now, as we go over to our outline, how much can we really talk about in 8 verses? Well, there's quite a bit here. I will say the writer of 2 Samuel details this period of David's life with it gives it much more detail, gives it much more time. And we'll kind of talk about that in our application section. But remember, here the writer is telling us about the rising influence of David and of Israel and their growing power in the region. That's his main focus. And I think that's why his account is significantly shorter than the author of 2 Samuel's. Section number 1, verses 1 through 3, Israel conquers the Ammonites. In the spring of the year, Joab led David's army to battle against the Ammonites at Rabbah. When Joab was about to conquer the city, he called David to come from Jerusalem to the battlefield. We know that from 2 Samuel 22, verses 26 through 31. David led the army in the capture of the city, took the crown of the king of Ammon, and made the Ammonites his servants. Afterwards, Israel went on to subjugate all of the cities of the Ammonites. So then our second section, verses 4 through 8, the Philistines and their champions are defeated. We've got some fun names to pronounce in this section. The second section of the chapter documents some of Israel's victories over the Philistines and 3 Philistine giants who were killed in the fighting. You remember who's the most famous Philistine giant? Goliath, right? Who David killed. At Gezer, Sibbecai, the Israelite, Sibbecai, who was in David's army at least, killed Sippai, who was a descendant of the giants. So Sibbecai is on David's side, Sippai is the giant who he kills. Elhanan killed Lami. Lami was the giant. Lami's spear was said to have a shaft like a weaver's beam. So he's got a really huge spear that, not a normal man wasn't going to be able to wield. And then in Gath, there was a man of, quote, great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. You remember him from 2 Samuel? He was also a descendant of the giants. He taunted the Israelites until Jonathan, who was David's nephew, killed him. And so that's all we've got for chapter 20. Again, Israel conquering its enemies, even the giants who once struck fear into their people. Let's talk about our application now. Do you notice anything significant missing from the story of David and Joab conquering Rabbah? Something we talked about in 2 Samuel? Well, although it's not mentioned in 1 Chronicles, David's first encounter with Bathsheba and the terrible things that he did in that situation took place during the time when Rabbah was being besieged, 2 Samuel chapter 11. Now, I didn't catch this the first time that I read the chapter, and it shows just how easy it is to forget about details when the author doesn't mention them. Now, to be clear, the author of 1 Chronicles, he didn't skip over the story of David and Bathsheba for any kind of nefarious reasons. It's just not immediately relevant to what he's trying to emphasize, and that is the growing power of the Israelite nation. But I think there is an important lesson here showing us that not every author includes all of the details, and that can sometimes get people into trouble when authors have nefarious purposes. We need to be aware that there are less ethical authors out there who do have nefarious purposes, who skip over important details when those details don't fit into their biases and into their intended framing. This is especially true when it comes to critics of the Bible and critics of faith. There are many secular historians and scientists who will present all the facts that seem to support their position and their opinion, but then they leave out facts that are critical of their position or that support the historicity and the scientific accuracy of the Bible. They interpret their selection of the facts according to their worldview, and then they avoid those that resist fitting into it. They just won't present them. So, if they don't present them, a lot of people get duped into believing that, well, they've presented all of the evidence, so I guess they're correct, when in fact, they're actually leaving off some really important stuff. They love to claim that they write as unbiased practitioners of science or history, but that is almost never the case. If you read their books exclusively, then you'll be missing out on a lot of important details. It's like going to university. You listen to a secular professor present the details about biology or about chemistry or about how the world came into existence, and they act as if I'm the bearer of all truth here. I'm presenting all the facts to you, and so they frame it up in a way where their side looks really good and all other opinions look really bad. And then a lot of people walk away from those classes thinking, wow, I guess they must be right. That they seem to have the facts on their side. The problem is, most of the time, especially in college classrooms where time is limited, you're only getting a selection of the information there. This is a good example of this. I took an elective in college on the Bible as literature. I was like, oh, this should be an interesting class. It was taught by a guy who clearly was not a believer. And it was interesting the way that he talked about the Bible. He took just pieces of the Bible, selections here, there, and presented this idea of what the Bible was all about. But there were several points in his lessons where, as somebody who's growing up, who grew up being taught the Bible, I could notice, wait a second, he's trying to make a point from this story, but he's leaving out a massively important detail from this other section of the Bible, or he's not reading the full context of what's going on here, and then he's presenting the Bible in an inaccurate way to fit, the story that he's trying to tell. Now, there were a lot of people in that class who, they didn't know the Bible that well, so they looked at that guy as if he was an authority, and they walked out of that class believing that what he was teaching was the sole way to interpret the scriptures, when in reality, he was only giving a selection of the facts. So, yeah, we're probably over 5 minutes at this point, but I do feel like this is an important point. This is why it's important to read widely and to consider a broad range of perspectives whenever you're evaluating the truth of any claim, because it's so easy for someone to present all the facts that support their worldview and then leave out all the other ones that are difficult and that don't fit into their worldview very, very well.